to see this guy go from being a Al-Qaeda terrorist to a rebel against the Bashar al-Assad regime to the president of Syria to being in the fucking White House is crazy. Dude, they had like a $10 or $20 million bounty on this guy's head.
Al-Shara won't just be the first Syrian head of state to visit the White House. Actually, he's already become the first to shoot hoops, basketball, with the U.S. military.
What the fuck? Yo, this is crazy. Imagine shooting AKs to shooting basketballs with the U.S. military. Bro! Former ISIS leader come to the White House. What do you think about that and why Israel gets away with everything? SMH. Oh, he went to the White House? Are you talking about Ahmed Al-Shara? Nah, nigga went to the White House? Oh, that's crazy. Bro really came to the White House. Okay, for those of you that are not familiar, who this guy is. Okay, let me show y'all guys, because I've been talking about this dude for a minute, aka Al-Jolani. So this guy right here, Ahmed Al-Shara, he is the current leader of Syria. Okay, he's the president of Syria right now. This dude used to be a member of Al-Qaeda, and also on top of that, you know, he's behind a lot of murders. The year is 2024, okay? As you guys remember, in 2024, Israel is pretty much wrapping up its first stage, right, of the conflict. They had just killed Hassan Nasrallah up in Lebanon. They had just killed Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. And what ended up happening was they had just launched the Patriot attack, right? So what ended up happening is Hezbollah got dismantled and disrupted. All their leadership was killed, and they were launching a ground assault into southern Lebanon. Now, they didn't make it as far as they wanted to, but they had done a significant amount of damage to disrupt Hezbollah. Once they had done what they needed to do, Israel and Lebanon signed a ceasefire, okay, in November of 2024. As soon as that ceasefire got signed, Syrian rebels who had been opposing Bashar al-Assad started moving towards Damascus. And I'll show you guys this on a map because this is going to be a lot more easy. It's going to be a lot easier for you guys to understand when I show you guys here. You guys got full context of what the hell's going on. So here's the Middle East, right, guys? Also known as the Levant. Go in, boom. Israel's over here, Syria's over here, right? So when Israel stopped their fighting in southern Lebanon, right? This is the base of Hezbollah. What ended up happening was a ceasefire was signed. Now, what the IDF really wanted to was make it all the way to Beirut, but they couldn't do that, right? So when the ceasefire was signed, what basically happened was your guy, this guy, Ahmed Al-Shara, was leading a group of rebels, okay, out of Aleppo, okay? This was like a stronghold for a lot of these rebels that are against the Bashar al-Assad regime. So, Idlib, this area, this is where they're from, right? So once the ceasefire happened and Hezbollah was weakened, he launched his attack, and they went and they took Aleppo, one of the major cities. Then from Aleppo, they worked their way down on the M5 highway and started taking more towns. They took Hama, Homs, and then eventually worked their way all the way down to Damascus. They did this in 3 weeks. Okay, chat? So Ahmed Al-Shara, with his forces, went and took over Syria within 3 weeks. Bashar al-Assad, the former president of Syria, fled to Russia. Okay? When he fled, because the reason why he was able to keep these guys from attacking him for so long is because he had support from Hezbollah and he had Russian air power. That's how he was able to keep these rebels at bay for so long. But once the Hezbollah was weakened and Russia was obviously fighting with the Ukrainians, they couldn't keep doing that. So they went in there and took Damascus within 3 weeks. And since December of 2024, he has been the president of Syria. So to see this guy go from being a Al-Qaeda terrorist to a rebel against the Bashar al-Assad regime to the president of Syria to being in the fucking White House is crazy. Okay, so now you guys understand the significance of this guy walking into the White House. Dude, they had like a $10 or $20 million bounty on this guy's head before.
All right, we turn our attention back to the White House now, where President Trump is set to host the first ever visit by a Syrian president later today. President Ahmed Al-Shara took power last year after his forces toppled the country's longtime dictator, Bashar al-Assad, in what was a lightning offensive. Since then, he sought to establish new diplomatic ties and end decades of sweeping sanctions imposed on Syria. CBS News foreign correspondent Rami Inocencio.
And that's a big reason. So Ahmed Al-Shara is playing a lot nicer with the Israelis and with the Americans. And when he came into power, Trump lifted the sanctions. Trump lifted the sanctions on Syria when this guy Ahmed Al-Shara came into power. Because what Ahmed Al-Shara did was he said he basically kicked all the IRGC guys out. Okay, so before October 7th, there was something called the Axis of Resistance. You have Iran that was the main leader of the Axis of Resistance. And what they basically did with the Axis of Resistance is rebel groups in different countries basically worked together to put Israel in a kind of like in a binding position. So you got Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, the Houthis, right? Hamas in Gaza, etc. And all these guys were members of the acts of resistance. And what would happen is when Iran needed to ship weapons and supplies and resources to Lebanon, because Hezbollah is right there on the Israeli border and they're the ones that fight the most with the IDF, they would utilize Syria to get those supplies into Lebanon. So when Ahmed Al-Shara came into power, one of the first things he did was kicked out the IRGC. What is the IRGC? These guys right here, okay? The IRGC can stand for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, an elite Iranian military force responsible for ideological and external operations. So right here. And the guy that used to be the head of these guys was this dude right here, Qassam Soleimani. So they were utilizing Syria as a transit country to get these supplies over. So when Al-Shara came to power, one of the first things he did was kicked out the IRGC guys, which is good for the Israelis and the Americans, obviously. That's a big part of the reason why they lifted the sanctions and why he's trying to exercise diplomacy with the West to repair Syria. Because, guys, Syria's been in the middle of a civil war since like the 2010s. Well over a decade, there's been so many Syrians that have been killed in this conflict under the Bashar al-Assad regime. I know I did a lot of yapping there, but you guys really need, the reason why is because I want you guys to understand this, the significance of this. This is a big fucking deal, bro, that a leader of Syria is in the White House. But yeah, if that all makes sense, give me ones in the chat. And if it doesn't make sense, give me a 2Y. I really skimmed through it, gave you guys like the quick summation, but that's why this is such a big deal.
On this, Rami, good morning. With so much happening, we don't want viewers to miss this. What can we expect from today's historic meeting at the White House?
Yeah, Errol, good morning. And historic absolutely is the word for this. And Al-Shara won't just be the first Syrian head of state to visit the White House. Actually, he's already become the first to shoot hoops, basketball, with the U.S. military. There you see.
What the fuck? Yo, this is crazy. Yo, this is crazy.
See it. He's playing with an admiral and a brigadier general. This video from Saturday from an undisclosed location in the U.S., and he did make one of those shots. But for today on...
Bro, imagine shooting AKs to shooting basketballs with the U.S. military. Bro! Now, I think we all know the truth here. Al-Shara clearly worked with the Israeli government and the United States government to topple Bashar al-Assad. He absolutely was backed and supported by the Israelis and the Americans because they didn't want Bashar al-Assad there because Bashar al-Assad was a supporter of the acts of resistance. Bashar al-Assad allowed the free flow of weapons and supplies to get into Lebanon, which would arm the Hezbollah, Israel's chief nemesis, to fight them. And just so you guys know, Hezbollah has fucked up Israel on multiple occasions. They tried to launch a ground war against Lebanon back in like 2006, got their asses kicked. They tried to do it again, got their asses kicked. So the IDF is not good on the ground when fighting another competent military, and Hezbollah has the most experience by far fighting the IDF. That's why the IDF can never make it past the Litani River. So to see this guy at the fucking White House shooting basketballs when they used to be shooting AKs is wild, bro.
On a serious note, right, what we may witness is Syria coming in even further from the...
Okay, this is when they first met. So this was in the spring, if you guys remember. Trump went ahead and did a whole Middle Eastern run. He went to Saudi and a couple other countries out there, Qatar, etc. And Ahmed Al-Shara came to meet him there. And this is when Trump originally relieved the sanctions on Syria.
Geopolitical cold after the fall of the Assad regime. The White House today is hoping that Syria will formally join that fight. The U.S.
Someone said Syria was backed by Turkey. The problem is that Syria had many different fighting factions. There was like three
against ISIS.
There was like 3 to 4 different wars going on in Syria. It was a fucking pandemonium. It was absolute pandemonium. You had the Kurds, you had Bashar al-Assad's people, the Druze. Like Syria has so many different groups of people that were all fighting with each other that have their own areas. Like the Kurds are up in the north, if I'm not mistaken. You got the Druze down south, right by the Golan Heights. You have the Bedouins, you have the regular Arabs. Like all different types of cultures are in Syria. And this obviously created a ripe environment for civil war and destabilization for over a decade.
Islamic State, with Al-Shara signing an agreement with President Trump. And really, this would be momentous because it would symbolize a major reversal of how Syria under Bashar al-Assad fueled the growth of ISIS about a dozen years ago that let it basically metastasize into one of the most powerful terror groups in the world. We might also expect discussion about the official removal of U.S. sanctions on Syria. This is known as the Caesar Act, and it would help with reconstruction of the country after the past something like 14 years of civil war. President Trump wants it gone. The full Congress, though, still needs to act.
And Remy, what do we know about Al-Shara other than him being pretty good at basketball?
Well, last Friday morning, this is interesting. Syria's president was still actually branded a terrorist by the U.S. government. But by the end of Friday, that designation was lifted. But he had had that label on him for the past dozen years or so. Since 2013, his terror-linked activities stretch back even further, something like 20 years. Al-Qaeda, several years in American and Iraqi prisons, moved to Syria there, led an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, but now he is going to be at the White House, and we are looking ahead to that, again, historic time between President Trump.
Now, this is a big, if you're a Syrian, right, for them, this is a big deal because Syria has been poor and war-torn for years. And what this guy is trying to do is he's trying to make peace with the West, lift the sanctions, and do better for his people. So I can't really be mad at him for that. But you're delusional if you don't think the United States and the Israelis didn't use him as a, almost like a proxy. And that's how warfare goes nowadays, guys. Warfare nowadays is no longer about actually conducting real warfare. It's about proxy warfare is the way to do it now, right? Because after World War II, world leaders figured out that fighting regular conflicts in real life and shooting each other and being in trenches and all this other shit, it was stupid. So instead, why not just back and support rebel groups that are fighting the same people that you're fighting? It keeps your people safe. Yeah, it costs a bit more money, but overall it's a W. And then heavily utilize intelligence agencies. And that's kind of where we are now in society, right? Now it's information warfare, bio warfare, intelligence agencies, coups. This is the new way. False flags. This is how warfare is conducted in a modern day society. The days of, prolonged warfare like what we're seeing from World War II, those days are pretty much gone. Besides like Russia, Ukraine, shit like that. That's an example. But that took a while to happen, right? And hell, that's even a proxy warfare. We're involved in that, but we're doing it from a proxy standpoint. We're giving them guns, letting the Ukrainians do the fighting for us, because that's really a U.S. versus Russia war. We're just using the Ukrainians as like a human shield. Pause.